Hi everyone, welcome to Tales of Dread. Today, I have an interesting story for you. First, we'll hear from a doctor who either had a hallucination or saw a demon reptile. Then we'll go to someone's backyard in New Hampshire, where they had the scariest thing that ever happened to them. Then, at last, we hear about a young boy who was taken away by aliens. So let's get to the stories without further ado. As a doctor, I'm always working at the hospital, day and night. I see weird things all the time, but I just have to shrug it off and keep working. But one thing will always keep me up at night. If you ask me out in the open, I wouldn't believe in anything that science hasn't already proven, but your channel has given me a chance to talk about something that really confuses me. I was checking up on a patient who had headaches all the time. She kept saying over and over that they were in charge. I had the nurse give her some painkillers and suggested that she be sent to the mental health unit. She didn't disagree with the treatment her doctor suggested, but she was very clear that she didn't want to be left alone. When I asked her who they were, she said they were reptile demons, and if she wasn't careful, they were going to take her soul. She said that they had been bothering her for years, and that she had tried to fight them off, but they were too strong. I tried to make her feel better and reassure her that we would look after her, but she begged me not to leave her alone. I talked to the nurses, and we decided that someone should always be close to her and keep a close eye on her. We also gave her more pain medicine to help her feel better. I talked to her over the next few days, and she seemed to be getting better and better. She wasn't as upset, and she was starting to calm down a lot. The nurses said that she hasn't been seeing anything strange or out of the ordinary lately. She even started to make friends with some of the other people in the mental hospital. It's possible that whatever was giving her headaches was also making her see things, but we couldn't be sure without more tests. I told her to keep taking the pain medicine, and to tell the nurse if her hallucinations got worse or if her headaches got worse. When I walked by her room one day, there were these scary shadows on the wall next to her bed. I had to stop and walk backwards to make sure I was seeing what I thought I was. What I saw next still gives me the creeps. A lizard creature looked right at me in the eyes. It was almost 7 feet tall, and the scales on its skin made it look shiny. It had big claws and yellow eyes that seemed to look right into my soul. I tried to run, but my feet felt stuck to the ground. Before I passed out, the last thing I could remember was how its forked tongue flicked in and out of its mouth. When I got back to my room, the nurses were all around my bed, looking worried. They asked me what happened, and all I could say was that I had to go check on another patient. A security guard later told me that the patient could not be found anywhere in the hospital. Her sheets were torn up and stained with blood. We never saw or heard from that patient again, and we had to call her family to tell them that she had left the building, and that we were still looking for her to this day. The family still hasn't found. But I have a feeling no one will ever see her again. Did the demon in the form of a reptile get her soul? The skeptic in me wants to say that she went crazy, scratched herself a lot, and then ran away from the hospital. I don't know where she is now. But my gut tells me that the truth is so strange that it can't even be explained. I keep telling myself that I only saw the reptile demon, because my patient told me about it earlier and I hallucinated. I keep telling myself that I worked too many hours, saw strange things that weren't there, and passed out from exhaustion. That's how it felt to me. I can still see every part of that lizard-like thing. I haven't even told my spouse that this happened to me, and I really thought I was going to take this experience to my grave. However, my nephew showed me an episode of your show on YouTube, which is why I'm writing to you today. Do I really think there are people who look like lizards out there? not even close. I just find it too crazy to believe. Any way you look at it, the reptile is there. No, there are no other kinds of reptiles. Did I see the lizard-like thing in the room of one of my patients? Without a doubt, yes. Because of this, it bothers me even more. Even still. Everything I know and think tells me I shouldn't have seen what I did. But I still remember it like it was yesterday, and now when people tell me about paranormal things that have happened to them, I pay attention. I think it's important to add that I don't take any medicine and wasn't taking any when I met what one of my patients called the reptile demon. Now, of course, I've never seen anything like that before or after that event, and I don't think I ever will again. But since then, I've never felt the same way about the hospital. My patients always tell me the strangest things that happen in their rooms, and I want to tell them that they aren't crazy by telling them what I've seen. But I will never do that. If I were in the hospital and my doctor said he saw a 7-foot lizard creature in my room, I wouldn't hesitate to find another doctor. Maybe one day we'll be able to talk about our own lives without worrying about what other people will think. I'll keep listening to your channel with mixed feelings and try to keep an open mind until then. I've never written for a show before, and what happened to me is keeping me up at night. If you read it, I hope someone will say something in the comments that makes it sound like they've heard of this or maybe even seen one. I live in New Hampshire, not far from Franconia Notch. I'd rather not say what the town's name is, but it's a small, Christian town. I'm worried about what my neighbors would say if I told them I saw this thing on my property. There are black bears here, and they always go through your trash. I've even seen a young black bear steal bird seed from my bird feeder. So, when I kept finding my cans on their sides, I was pretty sure it was because of bears. I don't think it's right to kill animals. I don't have one. When I see bears near my house, it's usually enough to go outside with a couple of frying pans and play with them, as long as I don't get between a mother bear and her cubs. Bears around here, where I live, are pretty easy to scare away because there isn't much light, and there aren't many cities. It becomes very dark. But since I was having trouble with my trash cans, you can see a lot of stars. I put a few of those lights with motion detectors on the back of my house. A few weeks ago, I sat down in my living room in front of the TV to watch the 11 o'clock news. When the lights turned on because of motion, I heard a trash can get knocked over. So I got up quickly and ran into the kitchen to get a couple of pots. Then I ran out the back door to catch the bears in the act. I thought that if I did this a few times and made a lot of noise when they were scrounging for cans, they might connect the noise with what they were doing and look for someone else to bother. But I didn't see any bears when I went out on my back porch. I looked around the yard with the lights on, but all I saw were trash cans that had been turned over. Bags that had fallen open were on the ground, but nothing had been torn open. At least, that's what I thought at the time. I wasn't wearing shoes, but I knew I had to throw the bags back in and close the lid or the raccoons would come by and make a mess. I went back into the kitchen, put on my wellies, and walked out into the yard. I knelt down to pick up one of the bags but stopped when I saw that the black plastic was wet. It hadn't rained in a few days, so I thought the can was probably dry. I was about to pick it up, but it kind of grossed me out to think that a bear or raccoon might have peed on it. I took a sniff, but I couldn't smell anything. I decided to be safe and walked around to the side of the porch where I keep a pair of latex gloves. I was looking for the gloves on the porch shelves when the backyard light turned off because I wasn't there. It's been bothersome since then. I didn't have any light to help me find the gloves, but I did find them a few minutes later without having to go back inside and get a flashlight. I got back on the grass and went through the side yard to get to the trash cans in the back. When I got to the corner of the house, the motion detector went off and the floodlights came back on. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. My blood is freezing. It was hard to understand. I've never seen anything like it before. It was hunched over the trash bags. It almost looked like a person, but the body was gone and the head was long. It had no hair and no clothes on. Even its head and skin were a strange pale color. It was like an animal because it was on all fours. I had no idea what I was looking at. I just couldn't understand it. I let out a gasp, and it looked up. Its face was incredibly scary. Big black eyes in the shape of an oval, and no nose at all. It had a black hole for a mouth. I think it saw me looking at it because it made this strange clicking sound all of a sudden. I stumbled back because I was too scared to even try to run, and this thing moved away very quickly. It went by quickly. It moved so fast that it stayed on all fours the whole time. The yard lights were still on, and I could see it now crouched on the side of the garage. It was literally defying gravity by clinging to the side wall of my garage on all fours. I couldn't look away. I was too scared to walk away from it. I was so scared that I thought I would pass out. It flew away, and then all of a sudden it was on top of the garage. Almost all of what scared me about it was how it moved. It was there, and then it moved to another place. Then the light yards went out because I hadn't moved for a few minutes, and then the thing was out of range. So for a split second, this thing and I are both in total darkness. The lights came back on after I took 2 tiny steps forward. I looked at the roof, but it was gone, thank God. I had to wait a few more minutes before I was brave enough to move toward the backyard, but I knew that if I didn't, the lights would go out again. I had to leave through the back door because the front door was locked. I didn't see it again. I went back inside and locked all the windows and doors. I put the trash can on its side on the grass and left the bags where they were. The least of my worries were raccoons and bears. Since that happened, I haven't had a good night's sleep. So, that's what happened. I want to know if anyone else has seen this thing and if they know anything else about it. I hope it doesn't come back. Even at night, I can't make myself go outside. When my grandfather was 7 years old, something very strange happened to him. He was playing in the backyard when he suddenly smelled garbage or something else that was going bad. He decided to look into it and started poking around at the edge of the woods that surrounded the yard. Grandpa moved branches in the foliage with a long stick, but he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Both of his parents had told him many times not to go into the woods alone, but the smell got stronger and his curiosity drove him into the trees. He walked carefully because he thought he was close to a dead raccoon or possum, and didn't want to step on it. After just a few minutes, he came to a small clearing he didn't know. He almost choked on the smell of rotting garbage, but that wasn't the weirdest thing. Right in the middle of the clearing was something that didn't belong there. He told me the story and said it looked like a silver Rubik's Cube and was 4 or 5 stories tall. The outside was covered in what Grandpa's 7-year-old mind figured was some kind of armor that shone a little bit where the sun hit it. It was perfectly smooth, and there was some kind of path that led down to the ground. At the end of the path, there were 2 figures that looked mostly like people, except for their strange clothes and long heads. It looked like they were ready for him. Once they saw that he was looking at them, they called out to him and waved their hands with only 3 long fingers to get him closer. They were wearing what my grandfather called work clothes, which looked like some kind of overalls or jumpsuits made out of the same material as rain boots. They were taller than Grandpa, but they weren't giants. Grandpa couldn't stop himself from saying that. He got up and started to walk toward them. He said that it felt like he was being pulled closer and closer by an invisible rope. He wasn't scared at all, he was just very interested in what was inside that shiny cube. He thought that these people must be from another planet. He had seen them in his older brother's science fiction magazines and knew they were from the far reaches of the galaxy. But his older brother told him that all the stories were made up. Grandpa couldn't wait to tell him about this before he knew it. He was on the walkway, and on each side of him inside the ship was an alien who wasn't touching him. Inside, it was bright, but he couldn't see any light bulbs or wires. It looked like the walls and a long hallway were lit from the inside. It looked like it went on for miles on each side, and the inside looked much bigger than it did from the outside. The three of them began to walk down the hallway. The aliens were making chirping and clicking sounds to talk to each other, but Grandpa didn't think they were trying to talk to him. He did wonder for a moment why he wasn't afraid. A year before, a little boy went missing from the small town where my grandfather and his family lived, so he was told many times to stay away from strangers and not go with them. He didn't know, and he knew that this wasn't what his parents had in mind when they talked to him about it, but who could have imagined this? On their long walk, Grandpa didn't see any stairs or doors. He wanted to see where the aliens took control of the ship. He also didn't see anything hidden that could have caused the smell, so he figured it must have come from the aliens. The taller alien finally stopped in front of a part of the wall that, to my grandfather's eyes, looked just like the rest. He reached into his jumpsuit and took out a card. He waved it in front of the wall, and it opened. And that's when Grandpa started to feel a little uneasy. It looked like a doctor's office, with a table in the middle of a big room. Around the table were a few machines, but what was scarier was that there were 8 more aliens standing there. They lined up with their hands together in front of them. The 2 people with my grandfather each grabbed one of his little arms, but they didn't have to drag him to the table because his feet were still moving on their own. He walked right up to the table and stepped up on the little stool that seemed to be there just for that. Grandpa sat on the edge of the table with his legs hanging off the side. What were the plans? They might hurt him. Would they take them back to where they came from? Was he ever going to see his family again? A soft chirping sound comes from one of the aliens. It slowly put out its hand and patted my grandfather on the head. Then, out of nowhere, it pulled out a huge pair of scissors. My grandfather finally started to yell, and that was the last thing he remembered. When he woke up, he was lying in his own backyard, just a few yards from the porch. He could hear his mother yelling in the house that it was time to get up for the day. It was cold, and both his head and feet were freezing. He ran his hands over his body, but nothing hurt or seemed wrong. He put his hand to his scalp and saw that some of his hair had been cut off completely. When I asked him what happened next, he just said I got in trouble for cutting my own hair. He never told his parents because he didn't want to get in trouble for going into the woods by himself. Tell me in the comments what you think of these stories. Thank you, and be careful.